This is an extract from the Leader Coronavirus Daily podcast by the Evening Standard and hosted by me, David Marsland. To hear the whole thing, search for it on your podcast provider.
The country's top civil servant and most powerful official in government, Sir Mark Sedwill, was forced out of both his roles at the weekend. The UK's chief Brexit negotiator, David Frost, will step in as National Security Advisor, a decision that worries some top former Mandarins, while his spot at the heart of Number 10 remains open. Our editorial column says Sir Mark may be gone, but we still need our civil service.
Sir Mark Sedwill has always known he might have to take a bullet in the service of his country. As an intelligence officer and then our ambassador in Kabul, he has put his life on the line. He has also survived uncivil war at Westminster until now. Downing Street's charge, said with a straight face, is that government is run by amateurs. Their critique of the civil service, set out in a well-crafted speech by Michael Gove at the weekend, is that it lacks professionalism. Asking those in charge the constant question, could things be done better, is right. But there are two flaws in the critique. The first is that it is dismissive of the talent and commitment of those who work hard in our civil service. The second problem is the lack of self-awareness. It's no good berating Whitehall for its lack of radicalism. To read Mr. Gove's whole speech carefully, you can see that his real critique is of political leadership in Britain, rather than a civil service that is unfocused, unserious, and won't throw the dice.
The Evening Standard's Joe Murphy joins me now. Joe, what's been the reaction to Mr. Frost stepping into the role of National Security Advisor?
Well, Bonnie, the reaction from the people who are real experts in this field has not been very positive. Gus O'Donnell, the former Cabinet Secretary, who is one of the most long-serving and revered holders of that position, has questioned it. And also Lord Ricketts, who has been a really big cheese at the Foreign Office in his time, but also he held the post of National Security Advisor. He said that this looks like not diversity, but a tightening of control by the circle around the Prime Minister. And this morning I spoke to Lord West, who was Security Minister under Gordon Brown and one of the chiefs of staff. He was the Sea Lord. And he said, well, if I was putting together a list of people to be interviewed for that job, David Frost wouldn't have been very high on the list.
What has Boris Johnson said about why the decision was made?
I've been talking to Number 10 about that this morning, and they're stressing, well, actually, not everybody who's held the NSA post has been a former spook or army person. Quite a few of them have had diplomatic experience predominantly. It's a job that's only existed for 10 years, so it's not set in stone, as it were. And they do point out that David Frost has had 25 years' experience as a diplomat, including as a pretty junior, let's face it, ambassador to Denmark. Before he went to first the private sector, he was incidentally lobbyist for the Scotch Whisky Association at one point, and then returned to the Foreign Office as an advisor to Boris Johnson, and subsequently our chief negotiator for Brexit. So they're saying he's well qualified in his way.
And finally, what's next for Sir Mark?
Well, Bonnie, what's next for Mark Sedwill will be a seat in the House of Lords, and then he's going to look after Britain's interests for the G7 summit next year, which is quite an important one. Who comes after him is an interesting question. What they've said is it will be a present or a former permanent secretary of Whitehall. So that rules out James Dyson being drafted in, or another captain of industry. And I hear 2 or 3 names in the frame, but none of them, incidentally, are household names.
Search for the Leader Coronavirus Daily on any podcast provider to hear more from the podcast.